I'm going to talk. It's your job. It's your job in the engine room to catch up. But it's 10 of. It's about time. Let's get this rolling. All right. So I've been running Philly.net for I forget how long. It's like 17 years or something like that. Any new attendees tonight? We go slap him. He just no you. Welcome aboard and find a buddy here to talk to so you know what's going on. But the new rules for those of you that haven't been here the last 2 months or so, Microsoft put a lot of effort and money into this new space. Very fancy. It's even got tables with outlets in it and new projectors and all sorts of fancy gizmos. So the rule is no food in here. Is that understood? Ever. Water's okay. No mixed drinks. If you have a little flask, I guess that would be okay. Yeah, this works out real well. We'll dim the lights a little bit as we get started. The other thing that's new to some of you is that all of these sessions are now recorded, and that means behave when you ask questions. In fact, if you ask a lengthy question, we may actually run over with a microphone so we can catch that on the recording that goes on to mixer.com. That's where it live streams, and then it's copied into a YouTube channel. So at this point, I'd like to point out in the back, Chris, if you could stand up. Oh, yeah, he's actually monitoring the feed for the people out in the studio audience. So Chris Gomez and Rich Ross from Microsoft are the ones that are spearheading all this technology. If you're curious about how they're doing this, whether it would apply to your company or something, ask them. Don't ask me. Some other things we got going on here. This is our meetup site, and this is where everybody's supposed to sign into meetups. And they finally forced everyone to use the new user interface on Meetup, and it's interesting. It's okay, more modern looking. But you'll see here that as you scroll down a little bit, this is tonight's meeting, and you can click on that if you want. Let's click on the title of the meeting. And that actually goes into the detail. And if you scroll down a little bit, you can actually see who the presenters are. So tonight we have, from Apprenda, we have Jason Van Brackel, that looks strangely like this. And Jeff Fritz from Microsoft is going to do the second hour. But once we get started, we'll just go straight through without a break. If you need to get something to eat or take a bio break, just go out, head to the facilities, come back. Some other things that you should know about this new space. When you come into the meeting, you are to go up the big steps out in the lobby. Don't come through the Microsoft office. So they're trying to make it so that the community groups sort of have their own path to get into here, and we have the nice little eating lobby out there. So it's a nice setup, and we'll just abide by their wishes. The other one I'd like to introduce, Mr. McCallion, if you could stand up. What's new in your life? Okay, so if you don't know Mike McCallion, he's been certainly involved in the community for well over a decade, mostly in the SharePoint space. And he just took a position here doing the Office 365 and all those related things. All right, so congrats to Mike. Any other Microsoft people that I didn't catch? Okay, so as we look at this page, you need to learn to navigate. It's a little tricky here. What I would do is I would click on the word Philly.net. Underneath, it's a link. Okay, and here's the trick. Go down to where it says Meetups on the tabs across the middle. Click on that. And then it shows you upcoming meetings and also a history if you ever want to go back and see what you missed. The important thing is, down, the other way. Okay, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a little thing called calendar. If you click on the calendar, then you can actually go see things that we're doing month by month. And I try and put something there to show you events in the future. So if you show February, you will see that there is a lab on February 7th, and we're going to do hands-on with React, Angular, and Vue. And then there is a monthly meeting planned, and we still haven't nailed down the presenters for that one. And then, Jason, if you could go to February. I'm sorry, March. You have to, yes, one of those. Okay. So we are in the process of trying to put together another code camp. It's been, the last code camp we had was mid-February of 2017. With all the construction here, we weren't able to do any events. So we've started that process. And we did a call for speakers and sponsors. We're not getting a lot of response just yet, but we're going to keep pesting people, and hopefully, if you could help us, we really need sponsorship to run an event like this, or else you can't come for free. So how do you learn more about CodeCamp? You go to our old site, which is philly.net, spell it out, .org. And you'll see that I have resurrected this. And if you scroll down a little bit and look at the fancy buttons on the bottom, those buttons, this is the way we used to do things. The one on the left is the upcoming meeting. The one in the middle is the upcoming lab. And then the last one is whatever CodeCamp is next. So if you click on the CodeCamp, you will see that there are a bunch of buttons there where you can do things like, submit as a speaker, find out how to sponsor, what it costs, what you get. Click on speaker submissions. And we are using a new cloud-based service called Sessionize to collect the call for speakers. So if you scroll down a little bit, Jason, you'll see, just fill all that stuff out and you can register as a speaker. We only have about 25 sessions submitted so far, and we probably need somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 or 60. So, did you submit yours yet?
I got Friday.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, but Rich Ross didn't submit his yet. Well, there you go. All right. So yeah, we are trying to pull that together, and hopefully we find enough sponsors, and we can. Does anyone know why it's important for us to get sponsorship at CodeCamp? Pays for food. What else does it pay for? Prizes, parties. Must be things with a P. The other thing it pays for is all the refreshments we have during the rest of the year. Now, we were blessed for a decade because a lot of the code camps that I ran were in the black, and we always used that money to fund everything else that you're used to coming here and getting for free. And that money is going to run out if we don't get enough code camp sponsorship and buy-in. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We probably have enough money to last us till the middle of this year. And then you're all going to McDonald's before you come. So that'll be fun, won't it? All right, so any questions on club activities? You just want to see a show. I got it. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to turn this over to Jason Van Brackel, who is working for Apprenda, and he understands everything there is to know about containers in Azure and other places. So, Jason, take it away. And Rich, what do we want to do with the lights? It's very responsive. The ones in my house respond much faster.
There you go.
Oh, you have to. You do. Is that okay? We have suitable ambiance. You may proceed.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Closer? Good? All right. Rich, we good? All right. So, welcome to .NET Container Orchestration with Kubernetes Helm and Draft. Again, my name is Jason Van Brackel. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with Apprenda. I've been there almost 5 years now. Those are my Twitter handles, my personal one. I also run the Kubernetes Philly meetup, which meets in Philadelphia at the Industrious office somewhere around 14th and Locust. And we meet once a month, once a month and do a topic on Kubernetes. The @Kate's Philly is the handle for that. Everything is advertised there. We have our own meetup. I'll put something out there later tonight. And then my own personal site, morehuman.software. All the links that I show here in the slides will go up in a post there probably, I would say, Saturday, just based on my schedule. I may not have time to do it till Saturday. So you don't have to worry about getting the phone out real quick and trying to get all the different links that I have in PowerPoint. Also put the slide deck up there. Feel free to steal the slide deck, use it. Anything else, it'll be up on GitHub. So I'm skipping all the talk on Kubernetes and Docker architecture. There was a significant video talk on this back at DockerCon in 2016. Everything that you could want to know about Windows Server containers and Docker is part of this. Everything you want about Linux containers is available everywhere because the technology has been around much, much longer. So I'm just skipping the architecture part of this because this is more of a developer-focused presentation than what I normally give on this topic. But one note, just to set your mindset properly as you're working with this stuff, containers aren't VMs. Sometimes they feel like it because you have your own little isolated environment, but they're not. They run very differently. So in our VM world, we're used to having a server that's running a hypervisor or a hypervisor server that has a set of guest operating systems that are all running copies of your app. Containers collapse that down. So you still have your server, and you still have your host operating system. But on that host operating system running within user space is your container engine, in this case the Docker engine. And then all of your apps running alongside in different instances. And Docker is responsible for all those apps living in the containers, setting the containers up, making sure they're running, and all the hooks back into the host operating system. So whereas in the VM world we're dealing with hardware virtualization, OS isolation, and a full copy of the OS, in containers we're not. It's OS virtualization. It's one step further away from the hardware. User space and namespace isolation is how we separate things, and there's just enough of the operating system for the application to use, and the Docker daemon is responsible for maintaining that isolation. So Kubernetes, in turn, is working along with the Docker daemon, whether that be Linux or Windows, to ensure for that separation. Now, containers don't actually exist; they're just an operating system abstraction. In the Linux world, they're on top of C groups, and in the Windows world, they're on top of silos. And if you go back into that Docker talk, there's an entire discussion on the re-architecting of Windows Server that they had to do to make this happen with Docker and Microsoft. There was a significant change to how the kernel saw the file system so that you get operating system virtualization at that level of isolation. But they're basically just a combination of either C groups or silos, namespaces, operating system constructs. In the Linux world, you only have one container type. Well, one main container type if you're working with Kubernetes. You can use Rocket or OCI, but generally we talk about Docker. In the Windows world, Docker containers have two types, Windows Server containers and Hyper-V containers, which is the default. The only difference is in the Hyper-V world, you have a very small in-memory virtual machine. So when you start up your Windows Server container, it gets started up in a very, very tiny hypervisor that provides isolation from the rest of the operating system in a way that Linux just doesn't need because it's architected differently. So here's your difference, your Windows Server container without the hypervisor layer, and then with the hypervisor layer. And I just point that out because it's one of the differences you'll run into if you're looking at Linux containers versus Windows Server containers. If you want to get started with Docker, because I'm going to skip most of the Docker part of this talk, because this is more of a Kubernetes-based talk. Those are the two like couple of minute quick starts available whether you're in Windows 10 or Windows Server 2016. One important thing of note, the version of Windows that you use is really, really important because Microsoft now has Windows on a multi-release per year cycle, and they've made significant improvements to Windows Server in order to support systems like Kubernetes, systems like Docker Swarm, basically your container orchestration systems. And that goes to the network stack, that goes to the file system. If you're not up to date in your version of Windows Server or Windows Server or Windows operating system, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to have a really bad time because things that are in the documentation just aren't going to work. So make sure you're up to date. So Kubernetes. You'll start seeing lots and lots of nautical things as we talk about Kubernetes. It's Greek for helmsman. It's also the root for the word governor. It is Google's third container platform, their first being Borg and their second being Omega. They've been doing this for over a decade. Its primary and only concern really is container orchestration and scheduling. It is a set of composable modular building blocks, and they run multiple types of containers: Docker, Rocket, various types of Linux containers, and Windows Server containers. Supports multiple cloud and bare metal environments, and is built on lessons that were learned building out Borg and Omega. So basically, Google built Borg, they built Omega, they rolled some of Omega back into Borg, and they decided to build a general purpose container orchestration system, which became Kubernetes. It's all written in Go. Down at the bottom is the Kubernetes SIG Windows. I only bring that up of note because if you start working Windows Server containers and you run into problems, go out to the Kubernetes Slack and join the SIG Windows channel. That's where the active development for Windows Server containers is happening. I'm a lurker out there. I don't have the time to put a whole lot of code into it, but that's where I've learned how to do a lot of this. So as you're playing along and learning some of these things, that's your best resource. Or hit me up on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer whatever question I know. Question in the back? So the question was whether Windows Server containers are supported on just Windows Server or Windows 10. You can do development of Windows Server containers on Windows 10. So if you were to install Docker for Windows, there'll be a drop-down, a button in the lower right-hand corner that's the Docker whale, and you click on it, and you can select either Linux containers or Windows Server containers. In the Linux container, when you're working with Linux containers, you're actually working inside of a Hyper-V VM that's basically running invisibly behind the scenes. When you switch over to Windows Server containers, it's native. And there's a little bit of magic behind the scenes that makes sure the Docker daemon can talk to one or the other, and that when you're in the command line, you're talking to one or the other. So like I said, Kubernetes lineage is Google Borg. Everything that you run in Google, whether it be Maps or Gmail, runs in Borg. There is a great paper, if you want to go out and read it, Large Scale Cluster Management in Google Borg. If you Google Google Borg, that'll probably be the top link, or at least within the top 3. But it talks about how they went about developing this system. Joe Beta, Craig McLuckie, and Brendan Burns, who actually is now at Microsoft and runs the efforts for Kubernetes within Microsoft. It is an open source project. You may contribute to it. You sign the CLA, hack on it, follow their contribution rules, and you may feel free to help. We really would love some help in SIG Windows. And some of the things that we're looking at tonight could use some help to fill out the Windows stories, especially draft. A couple of key concepts. And we'll talk about these a little as we go, more in depth as actually looking at it. But we know what containers are. The most important thing I want to talk about for our talk tonight is the pod. All of your containers defined when they're being orchestrated and scheduled through Kubernetes live in a pod. like whales, group of whales. So within a pod, you have multiple containers running within the pod. And the big thing I want you all to remember is they all share local host. Now, back in the early version of Windows Server containers with Kubernetes or anything else with Docker, the issue was that multiple containers couldn't share localhost. That was a big part of the Windows Server update that happened late last year. I believe that build was 1709 from off the top of my head. But without that, none of this works properly. So, a couple of old architecture images, just so you can see an idea of what it conceptually looks like. From the outside, you have what is kube control. Some people call it kube cuddle, but Twitter tells me that kube control is the appropriate pronunciation. Everything from the outside goes in through an API, handling all of your authentication, all of your REST, and then this is your master node. Your master node is dealing with scheduling, and then you have your worker nodes. Your worker nodes are all running a copy of the Docker engine. And then each pod, so the thing that has all your running containers in it, it can be multiple pods per Docker engine on a single machine. So of note, every container within a pod is on the same node. You'll never have a pod split across multiple nodes. That's why it's also show with local host. So again, your pod is a small group of containers and volumes, very tightly coupled. And that's your atomic unit of scheduling and placement. They share a namespace, an IP, and a localhost, and they should die. So when you're designing applications that are going to run in containers in a pod, they should be expected to fail and die and just come back alive. Now, I know you're thinking, what about my files? What about the things that have to persist? There's a whole bunch of stuff on that called persistent volume claim. But that's a little bit deeper than what we're talking about today. And then every worker node has two things running on it besides the pods, a kubelet and a proxy. And the kubelet's job is to make sure that the pods get created and the containers get hydrated into the pods. And the proxy is basically a load balancer, so that when you have multiple pods running the same workload, that just spreads the load. So if I have 3 replicas, it just round robins to the 3, or I can actually, I believe that's actually modular. I've not played with that. Then worker nodes. They may be physical or virtual. I said every node runs a kubelet and a kube proxy. Master node. And this is the 1.4 release, a couple years old now, but they've not done updated diagrams for the newer releases. So this is as new as it gets, and this is close enough for what we're talking about tonight. But it controls the cluster. It schedules all of the pods within the cluster. All those pieces are modular. The idea is that one day you could possibly have pieces of the master distributed throughout and not just have one master node. Permanent master state is managed by etcd, but no talking to etcd. The idea is that everything goes through the API. If it's not in the API, it doesn't matter. So we talked about where Windows is. So if you're in a version of Windows before, it says next Windows Server feature release because this article is old, but that's current server feature release. You have all these user mode load balancing, kernel mode load balancing, and CNI plugin support, and DNS search for Docker. Those are the things that make Windows Server containers work in Kubernetes and in Docker Swarm and any other orchestration platform you may want to plug it into, where it really didn't a year ago. It was really just a toy. So this is Helm. That's the technology we're going to talk about tonight. Helm helps you manage Kubernetes-based applications via charts. It deals with install, upgrade, rollback, and delete. And this really is a technology where your CI/CD comes in. We're not going to talk a whole lot about Helm tonight because Helm is basically just what Draft is built on top of. But at the end of the day, Helm is doing all the heavy lifting. So when you define your Kubernetes applications, you're doing so via a Helm chart. Whoops. So Helm has its own application called Tiller. Note the nautical themes. That manages Kubernetes application via charts. And these charts is just a set of Kubernetes API definition templates for your application, some configurable values, and metadata for publishing. So if you want to, one of the big things that is out now, that was not when I first started giving this talk. I'll open it up here. Come on, there we go. I go to Kube Apps. Kube Apps is your clearinghouse now for Kubernetes charts. So if I were to go to Explore Apps, I can search, let's say I want to run a Minecraft server. There's a Minecraft chart. And this is pulled right from their GitHub, because I've looked at this before. And it talks about, using the chart and running with Helm. So think of Helm charts like you think of Docker Hub. But Helm charts is not just the single container, it's the group of containers and the configuration, all the things you need to run a full-blown application in Kubernetes. And this is, like I said, this is a fairly new thing, the Kube Apps. It used to be, you'd have to go through the GitHub page and look at the charts and see what's available. They're now publishing this as an option, which is why you would include application metadata with your charts. And then that site is, of course, helm.sh. Pull this up to the top. And like I said, lots of nautical theme. And really, it is your package manager for Kubernetes applications. Going into authoring charts is well beyond what we're going to talk about tonight. But Draft will help you get there. But if you want to know more about Helm and Helm charts, this is the place to go. It's helm.sh. So Draft. Draft just extends Helm and helps you bootstrap configurations for Kubernetes-based applications. Now, while Helm is expected to be within your CI/CD pipeline, Draft is not. And everything we're focused on tonight is things that go on, basically pre-commit. So this is helping you get started with going from application you're going to write to hydrate a Docker image to set up a Helm chart quickly. And it does create, upgrade, and connect. Now, Draft uses packs, so like Helm uses charts, Draft uses packs. And packs basically have a set of chart templates. And Draft has a bunch of heuristics that scans your code and figures out what type of application it is, and then applies the appropriate packs to that application. And it supports a bunch of different languages. It does support .NET, but only .NET Core. Tony.
So we have a question on Mixer.
Yeah.
How well is Kubernetes integrated with Azure at this time? You may need to repeat that.
Okay. So question online, how well is Kubernetes integrated into Azure at this time? So there are two solutions within Azure for hydrating Kubernetes automagically for you. One is Azure Container Services, and the other is Azure Container Service. But they're two separate versions. One is ACS, and the other is AKS. ACS has been around well over a year. I would say I don't know what the official standing is, whether it's alpha or beta or what. It's beta or better. I would say the older ACS is definitely production. The AKS is still in preview. So if you want to use AKS, you actually have to go into your Azure account and enable the ability to do AKS. We're going to walk through that tonight. So we're still very early in this, both in Azure. The support from an Amazon and GKE standpoint is better, but they're also focused on really just Linux. Whereas Windows is, Microsoft loves Linux, and I really do believe they do. I've been watching this closely from the Microsoft side because I love Kubernetes, but I also love Microsoft. I started my career in the Linux space and spent some time in Java, but I've done most of my career has been in the .NET space. So I have a foot in both, and I love both of them. So I've been watching the movement of that closely, And if you look at the moves that Microsoft is making tactically and strategically around Kubernetes, you know, they have full buy-in. So that's enough for slides, because that's great for conceptual. Before I jump into code, let me stop right here. Are there any questions so far? Rich, anything else online? Oh, Tony. Okay, let's do it. So you remember that dead Christmas tree I showed you very earlier? I use that for a reason. Everything that we do in this space is in some state of development or preview or alpha. When we looked at draft says quite clearly, hey, this isn't stable yet. It's a good thing we don't put it on production servers. It is a development tool, but it's not. There's not a stable release yet. And AKS is in preview, and ACS is very young and is being replaced by AKS. And part of that is Kubernetes has really won the orchestration war. So as companies like Microsoft are going full bore into it, it's changing the strategy for how they build things, how they architect things, how they market things. So you're going to see a shift there. But because of that, I have to do this in a Linux box because draft doesn't do Windows yet. One of my side loves is open source software development. So I've been lurking around the draft GitHub pages this week, and I'm like, I think I'm going to start contributing here because I want to be able to work on my Windows 10 box natively without having to launch Ubuntu. So I'm going to launch. So if you go out to my GitHub, and this isn't up to date, I got to do one more thing with it tonight. Or go to my repositories. I have this Docker containerization with Kate's Helm and draft. That's the demo for tonight. I'm going to add the PowerPoint slides in there later, and I've got one little tweak I have to make that I figured out late this afternoon. But I'll also put a README file in there to give you instructions for how to run this. So everything that we're doing here right now, you can learn from whether you're on an Ubuntu Linux machine, some other Linux machine, or on Mac OS. I'm going to make this bigger. I bet this needs to be bigger, doesn't it? Terminal size. All right, where is that? Oh, wait a sec. There's a command for zoom in. That's right. You can see this is a problem of keeping your hand a little bit in both worlds. Is I forget some of the keyboard shortcuts and where things live. So I like scripted presentations, and I stole this this PowerShell utility from Doug Fink, who is a PowerShell MVP, and have been using it for years. If you've done any of his PowerShell talks, he uses this a lot. But it's basically scripted PowerShell run. So first thing we need is Azure Cloud Shell. You can run that right from your web browser today and log into your Azure account. So if you don't want to go through the rigmarole of all the downloads and you just want to play around in Azure, you can go right in here, and you have a Bash shell running right within your browser, which is really, really cool. One slide I didn't put into this presentation, and that would be very useful if you want to learn Kubernetes from the start. Katacoda, K-A-T-A-C-O-D-A. Katacoda.com uses this method, instructions with a terminal and a browser window, to walk you step by step through setting up Kubernetes. Like I said, beyond the scope of what we're doing tonight, but a great way to learn. And you can go right in here and just say AZ and do all the things that Azure CLI can do. But I want you to be able to do this on your own machine. So while that is awesome and great, if you want to do it from within a Linux machine, you can do it this way. Now I already have it. So it's not going to do a whole lot more. I'm just not going to replace it. We can copy over. It actually won't. It won't hurt it. I've done this before. But that will download everything you need and do the full install. And when you're done, AZ will be in your path. Just take a minute or two. Hey, you know what? So what it's doing is installing all the scripts for AZ, because it's basically a bunch of Python with aliases, and then it runs pip to wire it all together. All right. I'm just going to kill it. All right. So once you have the Azure CLI installed, you have to log in. Oh, I broke it. Okay, we'll rerun two. That was my fault. Well, we'll let that do its thing. Yes. So while this is doing its thing, we'll look at some of the options for Azure CLI in the browser. I'll go to code real quick so I can look up that site because I don't have it memorized. Like I said, our entire script is here, so I can go right here and launch my bash. So everything you can do from within the Azure portal, you can do here in Azure Cloud Shell. So I go to AZ, AKS. AKS is what we're concerned with. So from AZ, we have the ability to do pretty much everything within the Azure portal, but we have to front it with something. In this case, we're going to do AZ AKS. We have the ability to basically create, install our CLI, and do our Git versions. Let's see where. Oh, yes, I think that actually finished. It went a lot faster the second time. Bash RC. Okay, we're good. That was fast. So log in. This is the only thing that feels hokey at all about Azure, AZ. Is I have to go in, type in that. Oh, did I just do that? I did. Okay, we can still log in and just restart it. I forgot it's Control-Shift-C and Control-Shift-V and not the other way around. But we go to our device login, we type in our code here, and we're now logged in. And well, after my password. Don't save, thank you. And we're now logged in. We go back to our terminal and we're now logged in. Now I'm just gonna restart that. I'm gonna go back to 7 and next. So, remember I talked about this being in preview? This is how we turn it on. AZ provider register, and we say Microsoft.container service. If you don't do this, you can't do AKS. So do that. Mine will probably give me a message about it already being enabled. Nope, but it's enabled. It takes seconds. It's taken minutes before, but it generally takes seconds most of the time. Then you create a resource group. If you run any Azure, resource group is just a bucket that lives in a specific region. So I'm saying East US here. There are only specific regions within the world that have AKS available right now. So, you know, go do your research, make sure you have it. East US is one of them. I think they just had, you know, there's one, they're all over the world, but it's only specific ones. Now, I've already hydrated this cluster, so I'm going to skip some of these steps only because I don't want to recreate a cluster. It takes about 20 minutes. So once you actually create the cluster, the work takes about 20 minutes. So I'm going to show you 2 ways to create a cluster. Anything that says ACS is V1. Anything that says AKS is V2. The reason for that is because Draft is compatible with version 1 and not version 2. But I want you working and playing around in version 2 because it's the better built system. Like I said, dead Christmas tree. The funny thing about that Christmas tree is we brought it, we had to go to the tree farm and do the whole family thing because that's what we should do around Christmas. And we got this tree, and it was beautiful. and we bring it home, and I set it up, and I broke out in red itchy bumps all over my body. Wherever the tree touched me, I had red itchy bumps. And then we put all the ornaments on, and when I went to remove it from the house, all the needles fell off. And I use that because that's what this feels like sometimes, because all this stuff is in preview or beta or not quite ready for production. So sometimes you get some itchy bumps, sometimes all the needles fall off. It'll still hold ornaments though. And that's the important thing. And at the end of the day, all this will be production soon. And soon is not 18 months. Soon is like 3 to 6, maybe a year. Because when I gave talks on Windows Container Service less than a year ago, it was still a toy, and now it's a production, production almost, a little bit past beta. So old way, ACS create orchestrator type, because we used to care about things like Mesos and Docker Swarm. We don't anymore. AKS, same flags: resource group name, node count, and we're saying generate SSH keys. So instead of giving my SSH keys for attaching to my cluster, just for me something generated myself. I can do it all by hand, and I can provide it to AKS, but it's really easy to do it this way instead. So next thing I need kube control. Now Kubernetes has frequent releases. Current release is 1.90, soon to be 1.91. The API is built to be as backward compatible as possible, but the nice thing about this command is you get the version of kube control that fits the version of Kubernetes running on Azure Container Service. So you use the tool. Again, that will give me kube control within my path. So next thing, getting credentials. So to attach to Kubernetes, I need to be able to authenticate to Kubernetes. There are a number of ways to do that: certificate-based connections, token-based connections, username, password. But again, the Azure Container Service, the tool gives you a way to pull the credentials automatically, and we can do that for version 1 and version 2. And what that does, if I look at my home directory, I can now put it somewhere else. Well, I can do kube control, config, and I want to get all my contacts. Next, let's do view. And we can see all the information that it takes to attach to my Kubernetes clusters, I pull right from Azure. So it has all of the information on the cluster, all the information for authenticating, my tokens, and how all the security stuff is set up for me. We'll go back into so I can get Kubernetes the way. So now, at this point, we've told Azure to go give me Kubernetes. I put a one-node platform up. We can actually take a look at one of these. So I'm going to go back here and I can go kubectl, get nodes, and I've got 3 nodes. So in the old version of ACS, it automatically gave you 3 workers and a master node. Important thing of note: if you're going to use Kubernetes, you're going to have at least 1 Linux server. Even if everything else is Windows servers, you have 1 Linux server because your master has to be Linux. Currently the plans to have a Windows-based master are just not there. So if you're going to use Kubernetes, expect to touch Linux. I'm sorry. I can also describe more about these machines. Node. We're just going to... and find out even more about it. And we can see it's a Debian Linux box. We look at GPU information, but everything about your nodes here. If you do a Windows Server node, it'll be similar. It'll have a label on it that'll specifically say, "I'm a Windows box." So, what if we want to see what's running on it? Another fun tool of Azure is that we can just do it right from here, and I can say browse. And what this is doing is it's actually opening up, basically tunneling SSH into my cluster and giving me a look at the UI. Well, that's bizarre. So I had this earlier. I'm not sure why it's doing this. It does this on one and not the other. So this is the V1 version. I'm going to actually change over to the V2, which was popping up without a problem earlier. So we go into back in the terminal. We're going to Control-C that. Oh, did it really do that? Yeah, it did. Okay. We're going to go back to 34. This is why I script. And then the V2. So I've actually got to switch my context because, actually no, this will work just fine because I'm actually telling it what resource group and cluster I want. So it's not actually going to use my, and there we go. I don't know why the ACS version is doing that. Didn't do it before, does it now. But this is the AKS version that has all of my Kubernetes things in it. So when we talked about pods, oh, I don't have any pods running on this one because we were working on the other one. But actually, we do have pods. We just have pods that are in the namespace for the system. Will it show me that? Yeah, well. So, kube system. All these things like tiller, these helper, draft, all live in kube system. You can say they're elsewhere. You can secure them differently. But when you want to check to see if these things are in or not, it's kube system namespace. But I just want to show you that fun command as you're starting to work with this stuff. So, and we'll go to 35. So, next step is installing Helm. We've already installed Helm, so it's there and it's available. But it's basically you curl right into an SH file, change the chmod, and run it. And that will run the scripts to install Helm. Helm, like I said, is our package manager for Kubernetes. We create charts, and then we install Tiller into the Kubernetes cluster. Tiller is just a daemon running within a container, within a pod in the Kubernetes cluster that is responsible for handling charts and deploying applications via those charts. It just happens to live in the cluster. If I Helm init, it'll tell me it's already installed, but also configure my local environment to work with Helm. And then I can actually check to see if Tiller is running. You notice here the namespace flag. By default, Tiller ends up in kube system. I can get the deployment there, and there it is. If I just do a kube control get deploy with draftd or Tiller, it won't show up because I'm not talking to the specific kube namespace. I'm in whatever namespace my context is set up for. And really, namespace is just a separator between things within a cluster. So each namespace is like having its own cluster. Now, if I weren't already in VirtualBox, I'd want to install VirtualBox. But I'm going to skip that. And then Minikube. There are two ways of doing development with this stuff. One is locally on your machine with Minikube, and that's what all the instructions for draft tell you to do. We're not doing that. We're actually using Azure because I can't run Minikube within a VirtualBox unless my hardware supports virtualization with a virtualization, which my laptop does not. And then if you're running Mac OS, you can install a lot of these things via Homebrew. I'm not running Mac OS, so I'm going to skip that. Actually, Homebrew Wrapper is the version that runs on Linux. And then Brew, we're going to skip that. If you're in Linux, it's another tar GZ. We already have that. And then you're just basically copying the draft binary into wherever it is in your path. It can be user local bin, it could be your home, your home bin, whatever's available in your path. So, and working with draft is like working with Helm. You have to initialize it because it copies its own daemon. Oops, its own daemon out into your cluster. Now, it's going to want a couple things from you because it has to be able to talk to a repo, a container repo to pull container images and to push container images. And it has to be able to talk to Helm as well. So if I didn't install Helm, it would have yelled at me that I didn't install Helm. The other check it does is for repo. I redid this to point out something. So If you're using Docker Hub and not like a, not a KIO or a Docker IO, if you're using old hub.docker.com, don't put in hub.docker.com. I made that mistake and had to deal with some issues. So you just use your actual, whatever your repo collection is under Docker Hub, and then your username, not your email address that you log in with, but the username that you would log in with if you were using the Docker daemon on your command line, and your password. You all thought you were seeing my password. And then again, it goes and checks the cluster to see if a draft is running. If you make a change to your repository, run draft init again with a -- upgrade. Because I did it wrong the first time, it didn't work right, fixed it, but it didn't upgrade the daemon and the configuration of the daemon running within Kubernetes. So big thing to know, if you change something, run upgrade. And then install .NET. Already done here. But basically it's a matter of getting the Microsoft GPG key, trusting it, and then installing the .NET SDK. So those are all the things you have to do just to get up and running, but I don't have to take my code and hand create a Docker image and then hand create a Kubernetes file that represents all of my different things about my application within Kubernetes. I get a draft of it made for me, and we'll demonstrate that here now. So I'm just going to create an empty hello world style application. And that's all my scripted stuff. So if we code into this directory, we'll see what was just created was this very, very simple .NET web application with standard chprod file for .NET Core, startup, and the program itself. Now, this is one of those dead Christmas tree items, because earlier today it didn't work, but we're going to see if it does. I did get the demo working a different way, but not this way. So let's just see if it's changed within the last couple of days. I'm gonna go into my example. Again, we have our application, and I'm just going to say draft create. So, oh, look at that. Wasn't that cool? So, draft said, hey, looks like JSON, 98% chance. Do I have a pack? So something that I can go from my JSON-based application into a Docker image with the Helm chart ready to deploy. Nope, don't have that. Okay, sort of looks like XML. Do I have a pack for that? Nope, don't have that either. Okay, well, hey, C#'s in here, we're ready to sail. So now if I go into this, if I do code on this directory now, it's gone ahead based on its heuristics and its algorithms and created the Docker file for me. Now, if you've gone and read a Docker, can you all read this? It's going to be bigger. No? All right, I'll make it bigger. Not now. Zoom in. Okay, control equals. Better? All right, and we'll close this here. So it's created my Docker file for me. And if you've ever done a Docker image, I'll just translate this line by line. This says, hey, start with an ASP core image from Microsoft, base image. My working directory now within my file system is app. That's within the Docker workspace. Copy everything from my chprod and run .NET restore inside of the sandbox. And then copy all of our stuff from our application into a Docker image. And then when all that is done, this is what's going to start. That entry point is the thing that executes when you run your Docker container. So that's all of that took my code and said, hey, this looks like a .NET Core app. I'm going to give you the most likely Docker file for building out a Docker image for that. And then you go here and you tweak it if you need so. But you don't have to write that. And if you have a big complicated application or something in Go or Python, it will do that too. And then it also created this whole charts directory. So we talked about the charts being a couple things. Values you can change. So these are most .NET cores expose an external port and an internal port, and they have some base resources they try to hit. I can overwrite these when I actually run it. The chart itself is just metadata about the application. So for my application, you'd follow this in for your application, especially if you're going to, place it out on a directory like Kubernetes. And then your templates. And this is where all your hard work goes in. So if I were talking to Kubernetes manually without a tool like this, I'd have to create a deployment YAML and an ingress YAML and a service YAML. So in Kubernetes, these are 3 different API constructs. Your deployment is what is basically showing off what makes up my application, what images make up my application. You can see it fully templates this out. So this is all chart language. So this is how chart makes a repeatable, configured deployment over and over and over again for my really complicated application. It's this set of images with this set of labels, with these sort of policies. And then my ingress. Same idea. I just need to get my service. Service is what connects your internal container, your pod, to the outside world. That's all services do. They're helping set up and your ingress service is special. That's ingress is anything coming in. So again, everything's templated out for you. It created all those charts for you, and then the service itself. So what's going to be running within Kubernetes? What's being exposed within Kubernetes through the ingress to the outside world. Like I said, generally, I'd have to write all this myself. All the chart templates. Usually, what I would do is I'd write my POC without chart, and I'd fill in the chart templates. So this is probably just a couple hours worth of work on a really simple .NET application. I think if I had something that was multiple deployments and multiple services exposed and multiple ways ingress can come into my system, that could be a pretty heavy lift. And it does all of this for me. Now, if I want to start playing around with my application, actually see how I'm doing before I commit. So like I said, all these tools are based before commit. I'm going to go right in here. So I've already done the draft create. My next thing is draft up. And draft is going to go and build my Docker image. You know what? I'm going to stop that for a second because I want you to be able to see what's going on here while it's running. So I'm going to open a second terminal window. We're going to split the screen here. There. So I have 2 terminal windows. I'm going to open a second one right here. Oops. I got a second one here. I'm going to keep this one small because we just got this dealing with logs from draft. I'm going to say draft logs. That's not logs, not log. And all this is going to do is going to tail my logs. You can see here I canceled the last one. So this is just tailing my log file for draft. I'm going to go in here and say draft up. And if you've done any sort of Docker before, you recognize this because when you're building a Docker image, this is how it works. So think of each one of these steps like a commit in your source code repository. They represent an immutable container image file. So every time you build on something, you're building from the previous thing. It's all about deltas. So that's the nice with the container. The container image is immutable. So when you're starting up something with a immutable container, you're starting up the same thing over and over and over again. So when the same thing over and over again dies, we just start it back up. We don't care that it dies. We expect it to die. Because like I said, we're no longer building big monoliths, we're building microservices. We're just building smaller pieces of things. We would call them microservices. There's an interesting Medium article about the death of microservices architecture as a marketing thing. Because the fact of the matter is, microservices are awesome. they're also a royal bear to debug, because you took the monolith and you broke it up into all these little pieces that are more scalable and can be scaled horizontally and vertically across the world. But now you have to trace that thing horizontally and vertically across the world when it goes bad. So yeah, and your monoliths will still fit in a container. Your deployment's a little bit different, but it still fits in. And you can see right there, it went out and pushed it out to to Docker, to my specific area of Docker. And if I were to go over to, oh, it's done. So if I go out to my Docker hub, wrong thing. Problem with running a terminal. So if I go out in here, go out to hub.docker.com, and it's created this example and this .NET for me, based on just what I've done here. Example.NET I did earlier today, this I did today. And since there's nothing, since all of my Docker image stuff and my Helm stuff is boilerplate, so this stuff ends out on the web for me. So what if I want to see what it's doing, but I don't want to have to navigate outside of my development environment? I can just say draft connect. And now my app is accessible and listening because it basically created another tunnel for me between the Kubernetes server and my app. So I can go right here and go into, float to the bottom. If I go to localhost, what was it? Let's just click on it that way. There we go. Ah, interesting. So I didn't have this issue with the other version of Azure, so let's try that one real quick. Starting log streaming, production, listening on, connect to your app on. I just picked the wrong one. If I open that up and go, and there's my application. Tunneled local host, so I don't even have to leave my container. Now, if this were running in Minikube, everything would be on my box. But because I don't want to use Minikube, I want to take advantage of my Azure credit because Microsoft is giving a bunch of it away. If you don't have an Azure account, go get one. They're giving away $200 credit right now. That's a lot of credit. And if I want to update my application, I go write in code, and where does it put that hello world? It's been such a long time since I've played around in this area, I don't even know where that lives anymore. Startup is developed, there it is. So if I update this, good, ahoy, that is a good point, Bill, thank you. Ahoy Kubernetes. And I go right back in here. And I go draft up, and in this case, draft up is upgrade. And if we go open up my other terminal image box here, did I close that? I must have closed it, or not. No, there it is. And it's going and basically doing it's basically creating a new image based on my old one with the change I just made, pushing it up to Azure for me, so I can get ready to look at it. Now, one thing I do want to note is that you can have it do this automatically for you. So if you go to watch, and all that does, it tells draft to watch my code. So as I'm modifying things, it will watch, and when it sees a modification, it'll push up, and that watch delays in seconds. So I'm automatically getting updates to my development environment that I'm testing against that is closer to my production environment than anything I might have just on my local box, because it's up in Azure. I could actually create a clone of my Kubernetes production environment if I'd like. So about 5 minutes. I'm going to stop here. Any questions? Yes. Okay, so the question was, I'm running PowerShell inside Linux. I'm doing that for the demo because the demo code I have is PowerShell. It's a scripted file, but inside of my application here, I'm going to get out of here and go back into the cat or here. That's a small one. I'm just going to open it right here within. That's terminal. I want code. Open file. If we go up to code and here, it's right there. Install PowerShell. Trust the GPG key. Get the package list from Microsoft. Install PowerShell via apt. That's the Ubuntu way. It's either apt or yum or RPM, whatever you're using. But it's just a matter of making sure that the package list is correct for your specific version of Linux. And then you can run PowerShell within Linux like anything else. Like I said, I did that specifically for my scripted demo. If you just want the script without all the stops and everything, just open the script.
But PowerShell relies heavily on .NET.
Yeah. So the question was PowerShell relies on .NET. I don't know the mechanics behind how PowerShell works with .NET within the Linux environment. I'm basically just running a pretty vanilla PowerShell start demo PS1. It still has .NET framework in it. It'll actually break if I didn't fix it for Linux. Any other questions? Kubernetes related. All right. So like I said, if you go out to morehuman.software, all the links I showed in the PowerPoint, including the PowerPoint itself, links to the GitHub when I update it, all of that I'll put out there. Probably Saturday, Friday if I get it earlier, but Saturday this weekend.
So the application upgrade.
Oh, it very well should have. I didn't show that off, did I? Oh, we have to go run the connect. Other one. And again, we'll connect, and slightly different port this time. Copy. There you go. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Next time, could you wear a sailor's outfit?
I'd have to rent one, but actually, you know what? My brother's a naval officer. Maybe he's got something I could borrow. Just the hat. Yeah, he wouldn't find that funny, but yes, that would be hilarious.
All right, thanks much, Jason. So, Mr. Jeffrey, is he one way or the other?
Fritz is driving him.
Okay.
As I said, hit me up on Twitter if you need anything. I'm out there quite often. I'm more than happy to take questions. I'm also on the Philly Dev Slack and the Kubernetes Slack.
Very good.
Awesome. At Jason Van Brackel, which is a mouthful, or at Kate's Philly, KATESPHILLY.
Chris, do we have, how many people do we have online today? That's pretty good. All right. So his response was, we have about 30 people watching the live stream. If we can find Jeff Fritz, we will. You found him. Do you think he's going to come in? All right. While we're waiting for him to come in, is everybody ready? Fly, eagles, fly. On the road to victory. Ha, ha. Okay, we know where we're all thinking here. Yes, would you like to speak, Mr. Ross?
I could. Awesome. Thank you, Bill. That's my camera there. Let's see. So just a couple of quick announcements. One is that, first off, for those who I know Bill's mentioned that we have a YouTube channel, Philly.net. We actually reached 100 subscribers over the course of that last email that went out. Woohoo! Well, woohoo to all of you, because of that, we now have a branded URL that you can go to. So if you go to youtube.com/philly.net, all spelled out, that's where we get the archive of the videos that we're doing here. So you can get there directly instead of having to remember that long channel name that we had. One other announcement, just to kind of make mention of one of the other user groups that we have here in the vicinity, Philly Azure does a monthly meeting out of the same Malvern office, and upcoming in our February meeting is Dave Voiles, who's going to do a session on machine learning. So it's going to be a really awesome session. So if you have a chance, definitely sign up. There's a meetup site for that as well. Philly-Azure is the user group out there off of Meetup.
They're a Tuesday night?
They are a Tuesday night. Chris, what's the
6th?
The next date? February 12th for the next one. So, yep. And we also have a Mixer channel there too. So Philly Azure off of the Mixer channel there. So mixer.com/Philly Azure. And we do the same thing. We stream it out, and we also do an archive to the YouTube channel as well. Yep. Oh, it's Monday this time. Thank you. Yep. So this special occasion to accomplish schedules and things of that nature, it'll be Monday. And that's it.
He's not used to this new room, I guess. Huh? What? Sorry.
Turned on. Test, test.
Now you're on.
Hey.
Okay.
Oh no. No, I said exit. Go away. So about a year ago, I ran into this problem. Right? So Bill started to introduce me. My name's Jeff. I work on the ASP.NET team. I actually own web forms. I also manage WCF, a little bit of the old entity framework, and a couple other things. I manage a couple blogs, and I run some events you may have heard of called Ignite, Build, .NET Conf. You guys have heard of those, right? Okay. So I'm the one that decides here's the content we're going to put on there for developers. So here's the problem I had and why I brought up this image. About a year ago, I think it was November 2016, I spoke here at Philly.net, and it was right after our beloved Philadelphia Eagles played the Seattle Seahawks. So if any of my friends from Redmond are watching out there on Mixer, they know that our boss, Scott Hunter, pushed a thing on me and said, you know what, our Seahawks are going to beat your Eagles. And sure enough, in 2016, last season, they did. And this year, they beat us again. But we're in the Super Bowl now, right? Where's Seattle? So we're changing things up and wearing a different shirt for tonight's presentation. All right? So we're not wearing that Seahawks stuff out there. There you go, Hunter. Wentz.net. We need some more of that. All right. So let's see. It's been a while. We've done some really cool things since I last met and talked to you. Gosh, that was August. And I've got to apologize. I'm not going to be able to make Code Camp this year. Bill was really disappointed when I had to tell him, I can't make Code Camp in March. I've actually got another event that I'm going to be at that weekend. I'll be in Orlando at Dev Intersection. So I'll be there instead of here. My apologies. I was pre-booked on that back in September or something. So, but I want to talk to you about all the cool things that are now available to you in Visual Studio, in .NET Core, .NET Framework, cool things that we've built and done in the last 6 months or so. Sound good? Now here's the thing, I hate slides, right? I want to show you code, right? Because demos are powerful. This is where, right, we as developers learn, right, is writing code. So now just as we've got things streaming here to Mixer tonight, I write code live on Twitch and Mixer Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. So if you're hanging out, if you're with your colleagues, and you want to listen to me write some code, I've got a bunch of different topics that I'm writing about. Tomorrow, Myra Wenzel will be joining me. We're going to be talking about documentation and how you can get stuff on docsmicrosoft.com. But I'm doing all kinds of different topics on there, just seeing what we can do. And over the weekend, we're going to do web usability. So it's pretty interesting and some neat stuff that we're trying to cover on my live stream out there. The one thing that I did finish, we met a goal, we met a follower goal, and I'm going to host a live workshop, a live ASP.NET Core workshop online on the stream. The schedule's going to come sometime in February, but it'll be 8 hours, and a bunch of folks that you know, MVPs, other Microsoft program managers, will be joining me, and we're going to show you soup to nuts how to build an ASP.NET Core app. Now, I know everybody in this room knows .NET Core, because Philly.NET, we're pretty smart folks here, right? Right? Everybody knows .NET Core, right? Who doesn't know .NET Core? That's right. Nobody has their hands up, because we're just that amazing. We know this stuff. But for those folks that you work with who might not be as familiar, we'll have that coming up here in about 2-3 weeks, it looks like. All right. Let's look at some code. Let's actually get in and talk about some of these things that have happened, that have changed since about August. Okay? So we've released actually 2 new versions of Visual Studio. We call them 15.5 and 15.6. We actually don't even call it Visual Studio internally. We call it Dev. Why? Because saying Visual Studio takes too long. Hey, we're working on Dev 15. And you can actually see the version numbers when you go into Visual Studio and you select Help About Visual Studio, right? You see our version numbers right there. There it is, 15.6, and this is Preview 3. This is actually, don't tell anybody. It's not like I'm broadcasting to the internet, but this is an internal build because I wanted to show you a couple things that are coming. But everything that you're going to see here is available in the public preview, okay? So this is really cool stuff that I want to make sure that you see and you can ask questions about and we can dig into. So the first thing, the longest tenured thing that I want to show you that's in here is actually ASP.NET Core 2, all right? So you guys have seen ASP.NET Core 1, right? You're familiar with what ASP.NET Core is? Who doesn't know what ASP.NET Core is? Everybody knows it's amazing, it's fast, it's free, it's open source, use it wherever you'd like. Mac, Windows, Linux. So what's really cool is we have new templates available for you here inside of Visual Studio. Now, okay, here's something that kind of bakes me. Where would you find ASP.NET Core templates on the File New Project dialog? Guesses? Or people who actually know where they are? Where would they be? Web is one place, right? If I choose web, I get ASP.NET Core Web Application and ASP.NET Web Application .NET Framework, right? This is where we would do our legacy, our .NET Framework 4.7.1 projects that run cool things like web forms. Because everybody likes web forms. Man! So .NET Core over here, right? This is where there's a couple other things that we can do with that .NET Core framework, right? This is the .NET framework that will run on Mac, Linux, and Windows, right? The base framework that we build our ASP.NET user interfaces on top of. You can choose to build a console application here, right? Class libraries, test projects, and of course ASP.NET Core Web. So I'm going to build an ASP.NET Core Web application because I want you to see. Look at this. Brand new machine. You can tell because it's Web Application 1. All right? I brand new machine, first time demoing it. You get to see on this machine first time. Will it work? Yeah, give me a break. So I've already got ASP.NET Core 2.1 down here. I'm actually going to run with that. And I now have new templates that I can use, right? The Angular, React.js, React.js, and Redux, those JavaScript template SPA applications are now built in to Visual Studio, to ASP.NET Core. You can choose to use those, and you get that server-side rendering happening. And we've also got now Web Application and Web Application Model View Controller, right? Because we have two different ways that we can actually present content now in our MVC applications. We have Model View Controller, MVC, right, where we write our Razor views, the CSHTML is sitting out there, and you're going to pass some sort of a model into it that gets rendered, and it's wonderful. And we've got this other one that doesn't have a name behind it. Well, this one actually builds with what we call Razor pages. So who's seen Razor pages? Who's used Razor pages? Okay, so not a lot of people have seen and used this yet. Okay, no problem.
We had a session on those about 2 months ago, I think.
Well, everybody
for our main
forgot
meeting.
it, Bill.
Yes.
Nobody was there.
But we have no repeat customers.
No repeat customers? Fantastic. Fresh folks who are interested in hanging out. That's great. All right. So Razor pages live in this pages folder, and they are the CSHTML files that you know and love and look and feel exactly the same way that you would write Razor before. You have the same directives up at the top. Come on, give me my Control Plus. Why don't you want to zoom? Zoom. It doesn't want to zoom for me. There we go. Right, so I have those same directives, except there's a new one here, at page. At page declares that this is a Razor page. It doesn't have a controller that's going to launch it, but it can handle itself, and it knows how to start and behave as a view. Yes, Tony.
We have a question online.
Okay.
Have you combined Razor pages and MVC?
Great question.
Please proceed with that.
So the question is, can we combine Razor pages and MVC, Model View Controller? Yes. Yes, you can. I'll show you that in a sample in just a minute. Remind me to come back to that. What I want to show you is, so this is a page, and it has a model, and the model is called index model, because we actually have another class that sits here called index model that inherits from page model, and we can pass back and forth all those things that you want to know about your page launching context right here in this class. So things like being able to access request, response, cookies, headers, all that stuff you can get to through this object. And it's made available to you as a model that you can access on the Razor template. Now, you can handle all the different HTTP verbs, that's get, put, post, and delete, by declaring appropriately named methods here inside the page model class, behave, respond appropriately, set appropriate properties, and pass them back to the page where they can be accessed by saying model.something. Now, this basic index is kind of lame. There are other things here like that we're familiar with seeing. Layout, we're familiar with seeing that. We're familiar at this point with seeing some of our tag helpers like ASP fallback source on our script and append version on our script tags, okay? Those tag helpers still work and work great whether you're using Razor Pages or Razor Views. It's inherent the way that it's being used by the Razor View engine. So you're good there whether you build that tag helper. You can consume it in both syntaxes, both models. And Razor Pages is nothing different from the rest of MVC. If I look at my startup class here, now don't move, right? And we take a look at this, we don't have to do anything to indicate, to tell our application that it's using Razor Pages versus using MVC, versus using a controller structure. Let me see this here. Yeah, I'm good. So you're in great shape to use this syntax in your startup, which is the same in both frameworks, both MVC and Razor Pages, and you get the best of both. Choose however you want to output content. So now I mentioned I do have a sample that shows how to do both at the same time. And it's actually a sample that I've been working on stream, and it's called Fritz Stream Tools. I name everything after myself. I'm egotistical like that, all right? And that way I know it's mine. It's not Bob's Stream Tools, it's Fritz's Stream Tools. So in this project, and let me collapse up my Docker information here, I've got a couple of things going on here, and I'm actually already hinting at some of the next features I want to talk about. So this is my current viewer's Razor page, and it returns a model called current viewer's model, and that model goes and gets a stream service, okay? So a stream service is just a collection of information about the stream providers that I'm outputting content to. All right, now this project generates those cool little GUI, little visual widgets that I decorate around my live stream, okay? So I have things like the number of followers and the current number of viewers output right there burned into my video. So I go and get that information from the stream services and bring it back into this current viewers page right here. I set this property, and in the actual page, which is over here, I can now do a for each across the different pieces of information that that model exposes and output it just like I'm used to using with Razor templates. Easy. Now, I mentioned this also has controllers and views. You can see I have controllers here, right? And this has normal action result methods in it, so you can still interact and do those things and return views. And I have a views folder down here that has another Razor template that just handles and presents information the exact same way, but it doesn't have the @page directive at the top, right? So that's how you know this is a template that's going to be applied to a view, and the @page is going to be applied to a page. One thing that you should know, by default, right, we have some of these magic folder names by convention, right? Views live under views, and then there's a subfolder that's the controller names. But we also have this magic pages folder name. Anything that's under pages will be rendered by just browsing to / whatever that is. So I can go to /admin, and then this page will be open, this admin CSHTML page, or /current viewers, and it'll go to that. So if you like building things in that very page-centric model, and you want to have folders underneath of that with different pages named there, you can create those child folders under this pages folder, and they'll all just live there, and you'll be able to navigate it easily. This continues that concept that we have of separating your view content, the static content that you want to have, versus all your C# content, right? Because you remember, we already have this idea of root, where all of your static content will live. So I've got all my CSS, JavaScript, my JavaScript libraries in here, my fav icon, right? Those all live there. Web server isn't going to touch it, but that static content will be served, and it'll get a long cache header added onto it, right? That expires at response header, so that it's available, and you don't always download it every time. So Kestrel knows how to do those things. Inside pages, we know we have to parse those, handle those as a Razor page, and present those appropriately. All the rest of it we know is going to be C# code, and it can really live wherever we want. Now, the next thing I want to talk about with regards to ASP.NET is SignalR, right? Who used SignalR 2 with .NET Framework? Nobody. 2, 3, 4, half dozen people. Less than 25% of the room. Okay. So you're familiar. Who remembers what SignalR is? Right? All right, most of the room. Because we're Philly.net. We know these things. SignalR is that live framework that gives you that great responsiveness where it feels like your web page is being updated automatically as stuff happens on the server, right? It gives that feeling that, hey, I'm interacting and getting live content. Now, that's kind of cool, and folks used to do this by doing things like having a timer, right? Windows set interval, and then go fetch something every 10 seconds. And if it's different, go repaint a section of the page, right? SignalR uses WebSockets by default to open a socket, be connected to the server, and listen for commands from the server. So when the server says, hey, go update this value, it's immediately heard with an event listener and able to go and process and call whatever JavaScript you'd like on your client. But SignalR is even smarter than WebSockets. It's an abstraction over that so that if the browser or whatever client you're using doesn't support WebSockets, it'll fall back to those other things, including that long polling mechanism, all right? So if it has to fall back because, you know, grandma who still has the machine that she bought in 2001 is accessing your website, okay, we can still handle that with SignalR. Instead of telling her, sorry, you got to update to Chrome 65, 66, 67, whatever the current version is, right? Same thing with Firefox. Firefox is on this same pace too. I think Firefox 58 came out the other day, and it was an update on 57 that came out like 2 weeks before. Firefox is moving just as fast on this. But my point is, SignalR gives you that abstraction so you can constantly interact live with your viewers. So this project has SignalR Alpha built into it from ASP.NET Core. So check this out. I'm going to right-click on my project, and I'm going to choose to edit. And inside here, there's SignalR right there on my package reference on line 9. All right? This is an alpha build. But Microsoft, and particularly the .NET Core and ASP.NET Core teams, we're doing this open source, we're completely transparent, and we're making nightly builds available if you want them. Nobody says you have to do this. SignalR 2 still runs great on .NET Framework 4.7.1. You're more than welcome to continue using that and getting great support on Windows Server with IIS. But if you want to try the new SignalR on ASP.NET Core that'll run on Linux, on a Linux server and a Windows server, you can try this one, okay? It's not fully supported yet, right? You won't get production support for this. So try it, okay? It's something to tinker with. So I'm trying it out here as a sample to try and learn more about what's new in SignalR. So you can go out to NuGet and you can find Microsoft ASP.NET Core SignalR and you can install it. And what that gives you then is the ability in your startup class, because we have to register things, right? We used to have to configure our hubs, right? And our hub is our server-side feature that actually opens the connection that we're going to be able to communicate with. Well, here in my startup class, inside my configure method, where I would normally configure my pipeline, right? Where I'm saying, here, let's set up the developer exception page, let's use browser link, static files, I add use SignalR, and I configure my hubs that I'm going to be listening on. So I have a SignalR hub called follower hub, and I'm going to name it follower stream, right? That's my URL that I'm going to be listening on for that hub. And I believe I've actually moved my configure services out of here because it got really complex. I believe, yeah, when you're configuring your services, you do have to add SignalR in the same way that you added MVC. All right, I add my hubs as singletons in here so that SignalR can find it and start them up and keep them running in the background after they're requested. Now that API may change because, of course, this is an alpha. My hub, so I created a folder called hubs because naming, I do it pretty okay, right? Makes sense. This inherits from a hub base class, and then I have a constructor. I'm receiving a couple of things. Dependency injection will inject these services for me, and then I stash them away on a property, and then I've set up an event listener so that I can throw an event and then do something with it. Now, this object that I'm listening on, I actually created something because I wanted to centralize all my communications with the SignalR clients. Remember, you used to have to, if you wanted to send a message to a hub and you were outside of it, you used to have to create a static reference to it and kind of pass that around and find it, and then call methods to pass to all the clients on that. Well, now we can actually receive, come on, give me that follower client. We can actually receive into a class an iHub context and the name of the hub that we're listening on and we want to participate in. So I'm receiving this iHub context, and then I'm able to call, just like we did in previous versions of SignalR, that context clients.all, right? So I can actually say, go to all the clients and call this method on that client machine. So it's going to pass a message down that says, execute this method that's in that magic string on followers count updated. And that's why I created this class, because I didn't want to pass that magic string around to everywhere that I needed to call on followers count updated. Okay. Now, how does the client piece work? We used to do a NuGet install and we would get the client piece with all of our JavaScript, and we'd also get the server side bits as well. How do we do that in this world? Well, the client now isn't distributed with NuGet because NuGet only delivers .NET components. This is a JavaScript component because it lives client-side. So inside of our package JSON, we add a reference to the SignalR client, at ASP.NET, SignalR-client, and then the version number. We'll pull down that information from Node.js, from the NPM repository, using NPM and Node.js tools. Then we can start referencing that library and doing cool interactions with the server. Right? So you remember this? We used to be able to say hub connection start, hub connection on, and we would listen for a method name, and we would define it, almost an anonymous function that SignalR knew how to call and execute something on the client. Well, here it is, right? I've got a hub connection that is going to connect to the follower stream, right? You saw that in my startup class. I defined this follower stream URL. I'm going to connect to that and then define, well, here's on viewers count. Let me go find the followers count. I had that defined somewhere else. I think I have a view for that. There it is. So there we go. So there's my method, on followers count updated. So when I receive that, I'm going to go find my count element on the page, change its text content equal to whatever data was passed down in that argument, in that method call. That just makes sense. That's simple, right? I'm effectively calling a function, and here's the argument I'm passing. Go paint it on the screen. So if you watch my video stream, you'll see there's numbers in the corner that says followers, and that number updates as people click the follow button. And it happens immediately because this method is called, and it just replaces the number of followers right there. Simple. But you can get much more complex with this. You can build your own chat clients. You can build the next Slack. Don't do that. We already tried doing that. We called it Jabber. And then, I don't know if Slack saw that and said, hey, we can do this, and they made their own thing. But Jabber was a little chat room thing that our ASP.NET team built as a proof of concept a couple years ago when we first announced and showed off SignalR. So this is how you do some of those things right here in ASP.NET Core. And it's portable. Take it to, right, Windows, Mac, and Linux. Run it, compile it. It's great. Runs amazing, okay? So that's a little bit about the new SignalR that's in there. Like I said, it's an alpha. Check it out. Let us know what you think, all right? Because there's a ton more work coming on that. We have a couple conferences coming up this year. We have a couple product announcements we're going to do at some point this year. I don't have specific dates on those yet, but you can bet that things like frameworks being completed will be part of some of those events, okay? So let's move on and take a look at some of the things that have been updated here in Visual Studio. So the first thing that I want to show you is all around testing. Now, who writes, no, I want to let's look at this one. Nah, that one. There we go. So who writes unit tests and executes them in Visual Studio? Nobody. A few people. All right. And everybody else, you don't write unit tests because your code just works right the first time. Just the way it was meant to work. I unit test by pressing F5. Hey, it worked. Ship it. It's because we're Philly.net. We're that good. I'm paranoid. I write unit tests for anything that gets a little bit complex or I know I'm going to want to refactor at some point. Okay? So inside Visual Studio, and this is particularly the enterprise SKU of Visual Studio, okay? Of course, you know you can get Visual Studio for free as Visual Studio Community Edition. There's a Pro Edition. This is Enterprise. And there are constraints around whether or not you can get it for free. But we have a Test Explorer that hangs out here. And I love the new Test Explorer. We've got a couple of updates we put in here. First thing I want you to see is we have a new hierarchical view. And you can see I have that box highlighted there. The hierarchical view lets you see by project name, by namespace, by folders, and everything is grouped nicely. And what I like about this is it starts to read and look like the given, when, then types of statements that I have around some of my unit tests, right? Follower count by service should count separately. Viewer count by service should count separately, right? These are simple tests. Let's see. Identify client library. When client library found, should output, right? These things look and sound now, right? I can actually read down it and it feels more appropriately like the given, when, then statements. So I can run them and they'll run great and they'll all pass because, of course, all my code just works. Right? Please? Please? Okay, here we go. Stop it over there. What is that? Everything's going to be green, right? Notice? No, it's one ignore. That's right. Everything's green because, right, green means good, not Patriots red. Right? I got to take a shot at them. I'm sorry. So still runs and looks great here, but what I like that we've done, not just putting in the hierarchy view here, but we've also added, there's an inline analyzer that's running in the background that as it sees new tests, before it even saves, it adds them into Test Explorer. So check this out. Public void new test. First off, right? It should be marked as a fact. Check that out. Am I going to get it? Yeah, there you go. Right? I've already got some helper saying, hey, you should be decorating, making this thing a test. Right? So I still haven't saved my file, and it's already looking at that and saying, hey, this should be a test. So let me mark it as a fact, because that's how you label things with XUnit to indicate that they should be testable. And look at my sum over here. I now have new test there, and I haven't saved the file yet. It already knows it's there. It knows that it's going to have to run this thing, and it's already responding. So we're doing things to speed up the interaction between the Test Explorer and your code, and there's more coming with that, okay? So, and I get the cool little glyph here that I can click and say run, and it'll finally save because at that point it needs to compile and it needs to run. And of course it passes because it's not actually doing anything there. And of course, live unit testing comes with Visual Studio, right? If you have the Enterprise Edition of Visual Studio, you can turn on live unit testing, which is by far my favorite feature of Visual Studio 2017, because without changing any code, without saving, I know immediately if my tests pass and that everything's cool out there. So it's starting up in the background, and it actually starts a process in the background that's watching your code and will run tests as code changes. So let's take a look here. Once the spinner of patience there is done. So, yes?
Aside from the live testing, is it all the versions?
Aside from live testing, the Test Explorer and these enhancements to the test are in both community and professional. Live unit testing is an enterprise-only feature. Yes?
From online, why do Microsoft developers use XUnit instead of their own unit test framework?
So the question is, why do Microsoft developers like XUnit instead of our own unit test framework, MS Test? Good question. The reason is that XUnit was actually written by another ASP.NET program manager from back in the day, Brad Wilson, contributed to by Oren Novotny. Really nice framework, tight, small. It's an open source project that those folks were running in the community. As we started down the .NET Core path and we needed to write unit tests for our projects, we knew Brad, we knew Oren, and we said, hey, can you adapt real quick and let this help us get this running with .NET Core so we could test all of our stuff. And they got us up and running quick. And we ran with them for a bit because we're comfortable with that format. We're comfortable with how the tool runs. So that's what we decided to use. I'm showing XUnit here. I don't have a preference. I don't have a preference for XUnit, MS Test, or NUnit. I can use any one of them. I'm a long-time NUnit fan, from even before I joined Microsoft. I'm using XUnit here just because I want to show how to use XUnit. So, and my live unit testing didn't get hooked up here. There it goes. I got an error coming out. Look at that. It is a beta. Like I said, this is an internal preview. So live unit testing isn't working on this version. All right. So live unit testing would give me check marks down the side to show me what lines ran. So let's see, what else do we have here? What do we want to go to next? Oh, continuous delivery. So we have continuous delivery now baked into Visual Studio. Check this out. So this is an ASP.NET Core application, and I've got all the stuff built into it so it'll deliver as a Docker container, right? And my Docker containers, by default with ASP.NET Core, we have a syntax that starts a little bit like this. Obviously, it's got project names baked in here that are named after my project, but we now build your project inside of a container so that you always have the same SDK build experience, no matter which version of Visual Studio or the SDK you have installed on your machine. Think about that. Anybody have to build an old .NET Framework 3.5 or 2.0 project recently? Yes. Okay. You've got a machine somewhere hiding in a corner that has Visual Studio 2005 or 2008, right? But they're nodding and smiling. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I've been there, done that. I have the t-shirt. Anyways, so, see, that's what you get from being here instead of watching on the stream. Anyways, And I'm apologizing right now for that. When you have to, so you have to keep this old version of Visual Studio laying around, and that's a pain in the neck, right? Visual Studio is how many gigs of install, and the SDK is another how many 100 meg of all the libraries and tools and things, and you need MS Build laying around, and it's tedious, right? You end up with having just that dummy machine sitting in the corner that's running Windows 2000 because that was the cool operating system, and it becomes like a security nightmare because what happens if we lose that machine? So by putting the build process inside of a Docker file, you can store that image. Here's my build image that has the SDK on it. And then every time I need to build, we'll pull down that Docker image, do the build, and run. So now that we have a feature in Docker that allows us to actually have compound building? Is that what they call it? Where's Jason? Compound building? Is that what they call it when you have multiple froms? I forget what it's called. Yeah, it's composite build or compound build. The point here is I've got multiple from statements. I'm pulling from multiple images. And I've got a build image that actually I copy the project into, run .NET restore, and then go bring in the rest of my code and actually do the build, right? That's happening inside the image. Now, multi-stage build, thank you. Multi-stage build, thank you, Jason. So this lets me have all that stuff built in there, and then I can use Docker Compose to lay it out however I want to. Well, because I'm running inside of a container on a Linux-based image, I can actually right-click on my solution and configure continuous delivery to an Azure application service. Now, if you're running ASP.NET 4.71 or earlier, you can deploy to Azure App Service on a Windows-based server and get this same feature, okay? It needs to be able to find a location for your source code, whether it's VSTS or it's GitHub. It needs to be able to find that, but it will set up a VSTS build pipeline for you so that whenever there's a commit into, in my case, the master branch, it will see that change, run the build, and redeploy, and it'll even put into a container registry for me. That one, because I already have a container registry out here. So that's kind of cool. I can do that all from here. And for GitHub, because I don't log into GitHub with my, my account up here, you need to provide a PAT, a personal access token. That's real easy to do. There's a link here to go and allow you to go get it, and here's the notifications you need to set up. Once you do this, like I said, as you make your commits, it'll deploy new instances of your application every time you push into this branch, all right? So I've seen some folks say, I don't want to push into my master branch and say that's what's deployed. I'd actually like to have a publish branch. So, okay, everything's committed up to master. I'm going to do my last set of tests, and then when I'm ready, do a pull request into the publish branch, tag it, and then whatever's in publish, this continuous delivery would pick up and deploy, right? So then you can kind of schedule exactly when those happen if you want to schedule. If you're a little bit more aggressive and you want to deploy on every commit, go for it. Put it on master, and as those pull requests come in, it will deploy. It's really, really nice. I'm not ready to deploy this project yet, but that's how you use this feature. All right. I've got, what, about 15 minutes here, Bill?
Yep.
Yeah? You sure?
17 exactly.
17 minutes. All right, I'm going to jump ahead in my demos. I'm going to go back in time, back to .NET Framework, and I'm going to go to .NET Framework 4.7.1. Why 4.7.1? Because it came with, oh no, my code isn't here. Because it came, .NET Framework 4.7.1 came with the Fall Creators Update. All right, so this came out in October? October 2017 was the Fall Creators Update? Sounds good. We'll call it October. Might have been the beginning of November. Same difference. I'm going to go grab a project because I've got a bunch of samples in it. There we go. I'm going to grab a project from my GitHub. So my GitHub is github.com/C#Fritz, and I'm working on something called configuration builders. All right. So this is a collection of things that you can use to enhance the way that you do configuration in .NET. Does anybody listen to .NET Rocks? Okay. You may have heard me on that podcast, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. And I was talking about being able to configure your .NET application with ini files. Who loves ini files? Yes! Right? Am I right? Here's the thing. There we go. It's here. With the configuration we have in .NET Framework, you have that configuration manager .app settings, configuration manager .connection strings, and you can access configuration from there, right? Right? Configuration manager .app settings .all keys, right? I can do stuff like that and go get all my app settings, right? But if I want to read from a JSON file, or I want to read from environment variables, right? If I want to read from environment variables, dear Lord, I got to do something like this. Var this key equals, what is it? Environment, there it is, dot, I don't want to expand environment variables. Get environment variable, and then the name of the variable, right? Machine name, right? I think it's computer name, right? And so if I want to override some of my configuration settings with environment variables, I got to sprinkle this everywhere that I was accessing configuration manager, and that's a pain in the neck. And I don't want to go refactor my application to do that. So what do? You go and write some sort of strategy pattern where you're going to inject something that wraps configuration manager, and if the environment variable is there, we'll go get that thing instead. Nah. If you're using Docker, right? Jason, we love Docker. And you want to send environment variables in because that's a great way to configure your Docker instances as you've started your containers. You're going to pass in environment variables. Well, if you're passing environment variables into a Windows application that runs with webconfig or appconfig, you have to modify everything to make it work great in Docker. I want to use this syntax. I want to just access my app settings, right? So what you can do is you can go into appconfig, and you can add a new section called config. You can call it whatever you want. I call it config builders because naming, I'm kind of okay at it. But it's a system configuration builders section. This comes with .NET Framework 4.7.1, this configuration section, okay? And it's got a wonderful bit of syntax out here. Don't worry about that part. In your config builders section, you define, I've got a collection of builders, and like you're used to using, you have add, remove, clear elements inside of here. And this is to reference one that I've designed called ini, and it lets me read the ini files, right? So Carl and Richard, if you're watching this, this is how you do this. I can then apply my config builders to whatever section I want in my config file just by saying config builders equals and then the name of the one that I want to use. So whatever is in this ini file specified up here, and where's my file name? There it is. There, it'll dump inside of my app settings. Now this is ini files. This is one that's open source that I wrote. You can get from NuGet, you can get from me here. But what about environment variables? Check this out. I'm going to right click, manage NuGet packages. Not the installed ones. We want a new one. Microsoft. I forget the bit of it. It's configuration builders. There we go. So we have several of them available for you. We have Azure configuration builders, the Fritz configuration builders, which, like I said, I name everything after myself. It also has a really cool icon. Configuration builders JSON if you want to read from JSON files. But here's environment variables if you want to use this. So I'm going to click to install that. No, don't uninstall. Is it installed? Uninstall that. Right? Which application is this working on? Yeah, it's on sample ini. It's telling me it's already installed. Let's put it back down again. That's fine. Put it back down. Yep. Good. It updates your app config for you, and it will add this section information. It'll add the config builder section, and it'll define, here's my environment one, okay? No code changes are needed to use these things, all right? So I can start referencing my environment variables by actually just including it in this list. So the config builder's attribute there, it's a comma-separated list. Last one in wins, okay? So which you can list as many as you want there, and it'll evaluate and add those configuration items from left to right. All right, so it'll add what's in the ini file, and then it'll add all of my environment variables as app settings. That's pretty handy.
Right. It finds it first, the ini file, and then it finds it in the environment. Right?
Correct. So the comment is, if it finds it in the ini file, it'll add it to the app settings. But then if it finds it in the environment variable, it'll overwrite the setting that it pulled from the ini file, and that'll be what's available to you in your configuration manager. So my code here, where I'm saying configuration manager app settings, I don't change it. All that I've done is added a DLL to the project and changed web config, and it just works. That's pretty good, right? You've enhanced your configuration, pulled data from somewhere else, because we all love ini files, and it just works, okay? Now, this sample project that I've written, the configuration builder itself is an abstract class, okay? What I've done is I've added the ability to read from ini files or from RSS feeds. Ah, all right, there we go. So there's somebody who understands what this is doing. So now I can define an RSS feed somewhere out on the web, right? A configuration server, and put all of my configuration there. I don't need to run Active Directory. I don't need to run somebody else's thing. Start your own web service, host an RSS file that says, here's the configuration all of my Docker containers, all of my VMs should have. Use this thing, point the URL at that location, and it'll just load and run the settings. That's pretty cool. So there's actually a sample project here. Oops, I don't have... switch to PowerShell, because I love PoshGit. I'm going to check out my dev branch. I'm going to pull it. Yeah. Set upstream 2 equals origin dev. What am I doing? What am I doing wrong here? Git pull origin dev set upstream to origin. All right, this isn't going to work. Just do it. There we go. And everything reloads. Now this is a .NET Framework 4.7.1 thing, okay? So you won't, I didn't want to do that. So you won't have this in .NET Core, but .NET Core has its own different way to do configuration, so you can pass in however you want to read your configuration there, already with a bunch of different things. This helps you enhance your existing applications, right? With the main goal of getting things into Docker and particularly Kubernetes, right? Where you're going to be running lots of these things. So I have, here we go, samples projects in here that show you how to configure and run these. So here's the RSS one, and I'll pull from this feed location because I've already got a sample website that's publishing to that, and I'll put my RSS content right here. Now I have another one that's in the works that we're still finishing up that'll allow you to read from YAML files. Everybody love YAML files? Nobody likes YAML files here in the room, okay? You heard it, Mixer. Nobody likes YAML. I kid, there were about a half dozen people that put their hands up. But YAML files, right, are that hierarchical JSON-like syntax that doesn't have curly braces, right? It's all hyphens and quotes, right, and spaces, not tabs. I like tabs, but they mandated spaces. So if you put tabs in your YAML file, it breaks things, and that feels bad. But that's the way they do it. Okay. Whatever. That's the way they do things. So what's really nice that you can do now in Visual Studio, because you like tabs instead of spaces, don't you? And you like VI too, right? I'm kidding. I'm not going there. I am not going there. All right, let's do this. Let me show you. I have, it is feature not WAML, YAML. Yep. Git pull origin feature YAML. Yeah. Git reset. Hard. Good. Give me that. All right. What you can do with Visual Studio, because you like tabs instead of spaces, you can now add an editor config file to your solution. Okay, and this is something that's great for open source projects where we're not dictating to everybody, here's how our organization as a standard formats our files, right? You need to kind of push it on people and say, this is how my project as a standard formats our files. I prefer tabs. So I have this markup that says the indent style for all files is tab, except for YAML, we're going to use space. Now, editor config is a standard. This is not a Microsoft thing. This works in other editors like, I think it's Brackets it works in Atom, it works in Sublime, works in a bunch of them. And we're just adhering to the standard. And if you want to enforce other things on your C# files, we have other rules that you can apply there as well to enforce your C# coding standards. All right? There's an extension you can get that'll give you the syntax highlighting for editor config in Visual Studio, and by default, it will enforce this content hierarchically from whatever folder this editor config lives in, going down. So I have it living at the top of my solution, so all of my projects will adhere to this. Consequently, if you have, special editor configuration you want for this little project over here, write your own editor config and put it in there, and it'll apply to there and down. All right? So that's editor config. There's an extension that'll help you, like I said, formatting, IntelliSense, really neat set of features. But that's configuration builders and the things you can do with this in .NET Framework 4.7.1. Is there a question?
Yeah, because a little back, you were talking about Docker. Where would you store secrets needed by an application that runs on Docker?
So the question is, where would you store secrets that are needed for Docker to be able to access and consume those things? So Docker has a facility now called Docker Secrets that allows you to save and persist and send that information around a little bit more securely than passing them as environment variables. So we're actually working on a configuration builder to read and parse Docker secrets and load those into your application. Good question.
Can you say we're working on it? That's part of your live stream goals?
No. Good question. When I said we're working on the Docker Secrets configuration builder, the ASP.NET team at Microsoft is building an official one. So that's coming. All right. And there's other cool features that we're working on for .NET Framework 4.7.2. I am just about out of time, aren't I? How are we doing? Do you have another question?
One more quick question.
Sure, go ahead, Chris.
Does Visual Studio Code inherit the settings from editor config defined as you showed in Visual Studio Code?
The question is, does Visual Studio Code also enforce these configuration options? Yes, Visual Studio Code does know how to interpret and enforce these things. I'm not sure if it does the C# things, but the other standard options it will enforce.
And by default, I guess you have to install some kind of plugin to do that.
By default, the question is, does Visual Studio Code do that by default? Yes, it does by default provide that support. Because the other editors do that by default, so we thought, you know what, that's something easy to put in the box that is kind of standard and other people are used to using, except for those folks that use VI and Emacs. I love saying that. Any other questions? I covered a lot here. Yes? Nice shirt.
You mentioned that you own WCF. What are the chances of the non-Windows boogie bits ever making it into .NET Core going open source?
So the question is that WCF, what are the chances that the non-Windows operating systems get the server-side components for WCF? 0. We're not building it. Sorry.
Or even just release it open source?
Or could we even release it open source? No. Check out reference source Microsoft.com or sourceof.net. You can see the source code there. You can't just lift it and publish it, but you can be inspired by that and build it. There are actually a number of folks in the community that have started doing that because our perspective is WCF works great on Windows Server. We feel that it's pretty complete. There's a huge servicing footprint to that because things like TLS 1.0, right? That's not going to be supported by the web here over the next few months, right? That's being deprecated by the entire web. Well, WCF has that baked in a lot of different places. So how do we ensure that everybody gets over to TLS 1.2? So that's something that we need to make sure we have a good servicing release to ensure everybody gets over there. If we go and have to do that with all these other frameworks and operating systems where we have to touch all the different ways to manage that with WCF and all the different transport layers, it is something that we don't really need to do because it runs great on Windows. And it's Windows communication framework, right? Run on Windows. So, and if you want to run it in a containerized smaller model, Windows containers work great. Okay? That's all we have time for. I am right up against the gun, aren't I? I'm even over.
You are over.
I'm sorry. It's I've got a gift for gab. So,
All right, big hand for Jeff Fritz. One last time. Everybody ready? Fly, eagles, fly. Road to victory. Hey, hey, hey. Come on, Jeff, sing.
no.
You're not a player.
That's right, I'm not.
All right.
I just wear the jersey.
Thanks for coming, and we're still not sure what we're going to do next month. We're going to give away a book.
Why don't we give away a book?
Are you going to ask a clever question?
I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask a clever question. Where's my wallet so I can find the dollar bills?
In your back pocket.
No, that's not the right question.
No.
My first book is here. It's ASP.NET Core in 24 hours. It covers ASP.NET Core 1.1, okay? But everything you learn in the book does apply to ASP.NET Core 2. Nothing has been deprecated, all right? And it also covers a bit of Angular 4, because that was the version of Angular when we were writing it, and they versioned Angular too damn fast. So, should I ask a question, or should we do dollar bill bingo?
We haven't done that in ages.
We haven't done that in ages? Terrific. Let's do dollar
Want
bill
to
bingo.
do the...
Do we know dollar bill bingo? Did everybody remember that?
Okay, take out a dollar bill, and we're gonna match the last two digits of the serial number on any bill, and I'm looking for a 51.
Or the closest thing to it.
51. Anybody have a 51?
You gotta shout it out.
We got a winner.
Got a
okay, and your name is, sir?
James Zone.
Okay.
Congratulations.
You want that signed, or what are you gonna do?
I'm here. I can sign. Sure.
Just go ahead and do it for him. This is a touching moment.
Touching moment. No, so, true story. This is my 10th year presenting at Philly.net. Okay?
Woohoo!
So, my 10th year, my first book comes out. I got the job. It's kind of special. Thanks, everybody, for coming out.